Tortillas look simple. Flour, water, salt, heat. That is the story most people think they are buying. But in American grocery stores, some of the most familiar tortilla brands are built on something very different. The package says soft, traditional, family favorite. Sometimes it says low carb, sometimes it says authentic. What it rarely says on the front is that the ingredient panel can read more like a shelf life strategy than a tortilla recipe. And once you start reading those labels, the illusion breaks fast. This is not a story about one contaminated product. It is not a recall story. It is not a claim that every tortilla on this list is illegal or immediately dangerous. Most of these products are sold lawfully in the United States. The real problem is simpler than that. Millions of people think they're buying something close to a traditional tortilla, when what they are really buying is an industrially stabilized version built to survive transport, warehousing, and long shelf life. That means preservatives, emulsifiers, bleaching, dough conditioners, texture aids, and in some cases, ingredient lists that barely resemble the food they imitate. The closer a tortilla stays to the old formula, the easier it is to understand. Flour tortillas historically were built on a short list: flour, water, fat, salt, sometimes a leavening agent. The farther a product drifts from that foundation, the more it starts relying on chemistry to stay soft, flexible, bright, and shelf-stable. That is where things get interesting, because some of the biggest names in the aisle are not selling simplicity. They are selling familiarity. So this countdown is not about hype. It is about labels. Which brands load their tortillas with extra processing aids, which ones hide behind comforting marketing, and which two actually come closer to the kind of ingredient list most people think they were buying in the first place. At number 7 is Mission Soft Taco Flour Tortillas. Mission is one of the biggest names in the category. That matters because scale creates trust. When a brand dominates shelf space, people stop questioning it. They assume popularity means quality, but Mission's standard soft taco flour tortillas are not especially simple. According to the company's own product page, the tortillas contain enriched bleached flour, water, vegetable shortening made from esterified and hydrogenated soybean oils, plus smaller amounts of sugar, baking soda, sodium acid pyrophosphate, distilled monoglycerides, enzymes, fumaric acid, and calcium propionate and sorbic acid to maintain freshness. Some of those names are legal and common in processed food. That is not the point. The point is that Mission is selling a product that looks traditional while depending on a modern support system to stay soft and stable. Calcium propionate and sorbic acid extend shelf life. Monoglycerides help texture. Sodium acid pyrophosphate helps control lift and structure. Enzymes fine-tune consistency. None of that is there by accident. It is there because mass distribution rewards uniformity more than simplicity. Then there is the flour itself. Mission uses enriched bleached flour, not an unbleached or minimally processed base. Again, that does not make the product forbidden, but it does mean this is not the rustic, stripped-down staple many shoppers imagine when they grab a tortilla bag in a hurry. It is a manufactured tortilla engineered for scale. At number 6 is Kroger Soft Taco Size Flour Tortillas, standing in for the wider store brand problem. Store brands are where many shoppers expect a cleaner product. The logic sounds reasonable: less flashy packaging, lower price, fewer marketing layers, maybe a more basic formula, but often the opposite happens. The label changes, the formula barely does. Kroger's soft taco flour tortillas list enriched bleached wheat flour, water, vegetable shortening made from esterified soybean oil and hydrogenated cottonseed oil, then smaller amounts of baking powder components including sodium aluminum sulfate, plus cellulose gum, fumaric acid enzymes, and sodium metabisulfite. The cheap look does not mean a simple recipe. It usually means industrial tortilla chemistry at a discount. Sodium metabisulfite is there as a dough conditioner. Cellulose gum is used for texture. The shortening is heavily processed. Even the leavening system is multi-part. When brands like this get sold as an everyday bread substitute, the label tells a different story. It is convenience food optimized first for flexibility and shelf life, not for ingredient restraint. And that is the first pattern that starts to emerge. Premium shelf position does not protect you. Budget pricing does not protect you. The formulas begin to rhyme. And the industry knows most customers will never read that far. The average buying decision happens in seconds. A shopper sees a familiar logo, a serving suggestion, maybe a phrase like super soft or authentic, and the sale is over before the ingredient panel becomes part of the conversation. That is why tortillas are such a useful case study in food transparency. They are sold as one of the simplest foods in the store, which makes every extra industrial input stand out more sharply. Nobody expects a candy bar to read like a farm recipe. Many people still expect that from bread. Tortillas live inside that blind spot. There is another reason this matters. Tortillas are not occasional indulgence foods for many households. They are repeat purchases, weekly purchases, sometimes daily staples. When a product becomes routine, people stop auditing it. They treat it like a neutral background item. But background foods deserve the closest scrutiny because they are the ones that accumulate quietly. A long ingredient deck on a novelty snack is one thing. A long ingredient deck on something eaten several times a week is another. That is why this list is not asking whether these brands are edible. It is asking why a food this basic now needs so many supports just to behave on shelves. At number 5 is Old El Paso flour tortillas. Old El Paso does not sell tortillas as a standalone food culture. It sells an entire family ritual. Taco night, weeknight dinners, bright boxes, friendly branding, decades of habit. That image is powerful because it lowers suspicion. People expect indulgence from chips or candy. They do not expect a soft tortilla to need this much engineering. But Old El Paso's own ingredient list includes enriched bleached flour, water, palm oil, glycerin, baking powder with sodium aluminum phosphate and baking soda, mono and diglycerides, salt, potassium sorbate and calcium propionate as preservatives, fumaric acid, hydrogenated vegetable oil, and a dough conditioner blend made with salt, wheat starch, and enzymes. That matters for one reason. The front of the package says dinner, the back of the package says formulation. Glycerin is not there for tradition. Mono and diglycerides are not there because a grandmother needed them. Preservatives are not there because a tortilla fresh off a griddle behaves like a product sitting for weeks in distribution. The family image is doing one job, the ingredients are doing another. And one detail keeps repeating across this entire category. The ingredient panels do not just include one extra helper, they include entire support teams, emulsifiers, acids, conditioners, preservatives, texture managers. That is the difference between a fresh bread product and a shelf-stable imitation of one. At number 4 is Azteca 6-inch press flour tortillas. Azteca benefits from something larger than branding. It benefits from regional familiarity and cultural trust. To many shoppers, it sounds closer to the source. But the company's specification sheet for one of its flour tortilla products lists enriched flour, water, palm oil, sugar, salt, sodium bicarbonate, sodium aluminum phosphate, potassium sorbate, fumaric acid, mono and diglycerides, calcium propionate, enzyme, and a dough conditioner identified as sodium metabisulfite. That is not a short ingredient deck. It is a managed system, preservatives on one end, dough conditioner on the other, acidity control, texture support, shelf extension. And this is where the myth becomes clear. Familiarity is not the same thing as simplicity. Cultural branding is not the same thing as a traditional formula. A tortilla can look regional, sound regional, and still be built like any other industrial supermarket product. At number 3 is Guerrero Riquísimas soft taco flour tortillas. Guerrero is one of the most important examples on this list because it markets directly into the idea of homemade authenticity. On its own site, the brand describes these tortillas as soft, authentic, and crafted with high-quality ingredients and time-tested cooking techniques. But the ingredients include enriched bleached flour, water, a shortening and margarine blend made from estratified soybean oil, hydrogenated soybean and or cottonseed oils, mono and diglycerides, soy lecithin, artificial flavor, beta-carotene color, vitamin A palmitate, plus smaller amounts of salt, yeast, molasses, sodium acid pyrophosphate, baking soda, fumaric acid, distilled monoglycerides, and calcium propionate and sorbic acid to maintain freshness. This is exactly how modern food branding works. The language emphasizes tradition. The ingredient deck tells the industrial truth. Artificial flavor in a flour tortilla is not what most people picture when they hear homemade. A margarine blend with multiple processed oil inputs is not what they picture either. And yet the brand's identity does most of the selling before the customer ever reaches the label. By this point, the pattern is no longer subtle. Different price points, different branding styles, different target demographics, similar manufacturing logic. At number 2 is Ortega flour tortillas. Ortega presents itself as family-friendly and easy, the kind of product that turns mealtime into an uncomplicated tradition. But its ingredient panel reads like a processing map. Enriched bleached wheat flour, water, and estratified soybean oil, then sodium aluminum phosphate, potassium bicarbonate, cornstarch, calcium sulfate, ammonium glutamate, enzymes, salt, mono and diglycerides, hydrogenated cottonseed oil, carboxymethylcellulose, potassium sorbate, and calcium propionate to preserve freshness, fumaric acid, and sodium metabisulfite. When a tortilla needs carboxymethyl cellulose, multiple leavening agents, preservatives, emulsifiers, and a dough conditioner, it stops looking like bread and starts looking like assembly. That is the real theme of this list. There is an important distinction here. Many of these additives are permitted under U.S. food rules. Mono and diglycerides are recognized for food use. L-cysteine and other dough conditioners can be used within regulated limits. Sodium aluminum phosphate is permitted in certain applications. Legality, however, does not answer the question most ordinary shoppers are asking. They are not asking whether a preservative is technically allowed. They are asking whether the tortilla in their cart resembles the simple staple its packaging implies. In that narrower and more practical sense, these labels fail the test. That is what makes the middle of this list so revealing. The formulas are not long because the brands forgot how tortillas work. The formulas are long because long-haul modern retail rewards products that can be pressed, packed, trucked, stocked, reopened, and still feel soft days or weeks later. The customer is being sold the appearance of freshness after freshness is already gone. Once you understand that, the phrase homemade style stops sounding like a promise and starts sounding like camouflage. And there is a reason consumers miss this. Tortillas are marketed as accessories, not as processed centerpieces. They sit beside salsa, cheese, and meat, so the shopper focuses on fillings and treats the wrap itself like neutral packaging. That is a mistake. The tortilla is the foundation of the meal. If the foundation is heavily stabilized, every soft taco or burrito starts with a product whose entire job is to mimic freshness long after the original dough should have changed. That is why the tortilla deserves scrutiny, not just the meat, cheese, salsa, or story wrapped around it. These products are not being designed to resemble a kitchen. They are being designed to survive a retail system. And now we get to number 1, the category that may be the most aggressively marketed of all. Low-carb tortillas with Mission Carb Balance as the clearest example. Low-carb tortillas are not automatically bad because they target a diet trend. They are at the top of this list because the health halo is often stronger than the food itself. When people see carb balance, keto-friendly, or high fiber, they tend to lower their guard. They assume the product has been cleaned up. In many cases, it has been engineered even further. Mission's Carb Balance Soft Taco Flour Tortillas list water, modified wheat starch, wheat flour, vital wheat gluten isolate, vegetable shortening made from esterfied and hydrogenated soybean oils, salt, calcium propionate, distilled monoglycerides, sodium acid pyrophosphate, baking soda, sorbic acid, fumaric acid, cellulose gum, and stevil glycosides. Read that slowly. The first ingredient is water, then modified wheat starch, then multiple concentrated wheat fractions, then processed oils, then preservatives, then texture support, then a non-nutritive sweetener. This is not a simpler tortilla with fewer carbs. It is a reformulated product built to simulate tortilla behavior while forcing the nutrition panel into a specific marketing lane. That is why low-carb tortillas land at number 1. Not because they are uniquely toxic, not because they are illegal, but because they are sold as the smart choice while often becoming the most manipulated choice in the entire aisle. The healthier the front sounds, the more important the back becomes. So those are the 7 to think twice about. Mission Standard Flour Tortillas, Kroger-style store brands, Old El Paso, Azteca, Guerrero, Ortega, and the low-carb category led by Mission Carb Balance. Different stories, same pattern, long ingredient decks, multiple functional additives, a product built for consistency, distance, and shelf life before anything else. Now for the 2 brands that come closer to what shoppers usually mean when they say they want a safer tortilla. Number 2 on the safer side is Sayat Almond Flour Tortillas. Sayat is not traditional in the wheat flour sense. It is a grain-free product, but that is not why it makes this side of the list. It makes the list because the ingredient panel is dramatically shorter. The company's almond flour tortillas list almond flour, tapioca starch, water, sea salt, and xanthan gum. 5 ingredients, that is it. No calcium propionate, no sorbic acid, no hydrogenated oil blend, no bleaching, no multi-part dough conditioner system. That does not mean every shopper will prefer the texture. It does not mean almond flour is for everyone. It means the product is legible. You can read it once and understand what it is. That alone puts it far ahead of most major supermarket tortillas. Then there is the final pick. The best option in this lineup is La Tortilla Factory Organic Traditional Flour Tortillas. This brand still uses more than 4 ingredients, so it is not a perfect homemade equivalent. But compared with the products on the avoid list, the formula is restrained. According to the brand's own page, the organic traditional flour tortillas contain organic wheat flour, water, organic palm fruit oil, small amounts of baking powder components, organic cultured wheat flour, de-oiled sunflower lecithin, tartaric acid, organic cane sugar, organic guar gum, and sea salt. That is still a commercial product, but it avoids the long chain of preservatives and hydrogenated oil language seen across many mass-market competitors. More importantly, the ingredient deck reads like a company trying to make a workable packaged tortilla without leaning as hard on the typical preservation toolkit. Organic flour, water, oil, salt, some supporting ingredients, yes, but not the same parade of propionates, sorbates, hydrogenated blends, artificial flavor, and aggressive shelf life engineering. If you want the cleanest practical rule, it is this: the shorter the ingredient list, the less explanation the product usually needs. Shorter does not automatically mean perfect. A short label can still include an ingredient some buyers want to avoid, and a long label can still be lawful and widely tolerated. But shorter labels usually do mean fewer unknowns, fewer texture tricks, and fewer moving parts between the original dough and the finished package. That matters, especially in a category that has normalized ingredient decks most people would never expect from flatbread. It earns its place because the product does not pretend complexity is simplicity. You can disagree with grain-free marketing. You can prefer wheat, but the panel is transparent. Almond flour means almond flour. Tapioca starch means tapioca starch. The consumer is not forced to decode a technical vocabulary list just to understand dinner. La Tortilla Factory earns the top safer spot for a different reason. It offers a more conventional flour tortilla format without sliding as far into the standard mass-market preservation model. That makes it easier for shoppers who still want a familiar flour tortilla texture but do not want one of the most aggressively industrialized labels in the aisle. In a category this crowded with processing aids, relative restraint counts. That matters because ingredient literacy is really about probability. The more moving parts a packaged food requires, the more opportunities there are for consumers to misunderstand what they are eating. A 5-ingredient tortilla is not automatically superior in every nutritional sense, but it is easier to audit, easier to compare, and harder to disguise behind branding language. In a supermarket full of flour tortillas that read like industrial maintenance plans, that clarity becomes its own advantage. That is why the safest supermarket rule is simple. If the ingredient panel reads like it needs a glossary, keep walking. If it reads like ordinary food, you can at least understand the trade you are making before you buy it, and that brings us back to the bigger issue. Most people do not choose tortillas by ingredient panel. They choose by habit, by logo, by price, by the words authentic, family, carb balance, or soft taco. They trust the front because the front was designed to be trusted. But tortillas are one of the clearest examples of how modern packaged food turns a simple staple into a branded illusion. The basic shape stays the same. The chemistry underneath changes completely. If a tortilla needs bleaching, hydrogenated oil inputs, emulsifiers, preservatives, acidity regulators, texture gums, and dough conditioners, then the package should not get to coast on the image of old-world simplicity. That is the disconnect this entire category depends on. Consumers still imagine a griddle. The label keeps describing a factory. There is also a second lesson hidden in this aisle. Health marketing can be more misleading than indulgence marketing. When a product openly looks processed, people stay cautious. When it says low carb or high fiber, they relax. That is exactly why the low carb segment deserves extra scrutiny. Mission Carb Balance is not alone in this. Across the category, the nutritional pitch often gets achieved by rebuilding the tortilla from isolated starches, gluten fractions, gums, preservatives, and stabilizers. The result may satisfy a macro target, but it can move even farther away from the food people think they are buying. The same goes for authenticity marketing. A name that sounds traditional does not guarantee a traditional formula. A family story does not erase industrial additives. A heritage visual does not cancel out hydrogenated oils, flavoring systems, or chemical preservatives. In this category, nostalgia is often just another ingredient. It is printed on the front so you never study the back. That is why the real winner is not any single brand. The real winner is the person who starts reading labels with a colder eye. Look for the shortest ingredient list. Look for products that do not need preservatives to imitate freshness. Look for tortillas that stay close to a recognizable formula instead of wandering into a laboratory vocabulary set. And to be fair, none of this means you can never buy a processed tortilla again. It means you should know what you are paying for. Convenience has a formula, shelf life has a formula, softness after weeks in plastic has a formula. Once you understand that, the aisle stops looking wholesome and starts looking strategic. So if you are standing in the store and want the shortest version of this investigation, here it is. Think twice about Mission's soft taco flour tortillas for the bleached flour. hydrogenated oil shortening monoglycerides and preservative system. Think twice about store-brand tortillas like Kroger for the same industrial structure hiding behind a cheaper label. Think twice about Old El Paso for the glycerin, mono and diglycerides, preservatives, and dough conditioner blend. Think twice about Azteca for the preservatives, mono and diglycerides, and sodium metabisulfite. Think twice about Guerrero for the margarine blend, artificial flavor, emulsifiers, and preservatives wrapped in homemade language. Think twice about Ortega for the sheer density of processing aids. And think hardest about low-carb tortillas when the healthy branding is doing more work than the ingredients deserve. If you want the better bets from this list, start with Sayat if you are comfortable with grain-free tortillas and want one of the shortest ingredient panels in the category. And if you want a more conventional packaged flour tortilla, La Tortilla Factory is the closest thing here to a commercially practical middle ground. That is the entire trick. Stop buying the promise, start reading the panel. Because once you see how many tortillas in America are held together by preservation systems, dough conditioners, processed oils, and marketing language, the question changes. It is no longer which tortilla tastes fine. It is which tortilla still looks like food. Now check the tortillas in your kitchen. Which brand are you eating, and did the label look the way you expected? There's a reason that matters beyond tortillas. Packaged bread products are where modern food processing often hides in plain sight. They do not look like ultra-processed foods because the shape is old and familiar. They look domestic, harmless, basic. That visual familiarity lowers resistance. But the supply chain demands a product that bends without cracking, resists mold, survives freight, and reopens days later with the same soft feel. Every additive on these labels exists to solve one of those commercial problems. Once you start reading tortillas that way, the aisle becomes much easier to understand. It also becomes easier to ignore price theater. Expensive does not guarantee simple. Cheap does not guarantee honest. Heritage branding does not guarantee restraint. Health branding does not guarantee cleaner formulation. The real divide is not premium versus budget. It is short label versus long label. Recognizable pantry ingredients versus industrial support ingredients. A tortilla made to be eaten soon behaves one way. A tortilla made to sit, travel, and still imitate freshness behaves another. The labels tell you which one you are holding, but only if you bother to read them. And once you see that pattern, the buying rule becomes blunt. Ignore the logo first, ignore the nostalgia first, ignore the wellness buzzwords first, flip the package over. If the ingredient list starts sounding like a chemistry worksheet, put it back. If the label stays close to flour, water, fat, salt, and a small number of understandable supporting ingredients, you are at least closer to the food tradition the brand image is borrowing from. That is the standard this entire category should have been judged by from the start. Not ad copy, not color palette, not shelf position, not fake familiarity, just the panel. The panel is where the factory stops talking like a storyteller and starts talking like a manufacturer, which is usually when the truth finally shows up. That is where marketing ends and the ingredient reality really begins.